The history of civilization is at bottom the history of food security. Everything else, politics, culture, war, trade, is downstream of whether people are fed. We are about to be reminded of this forcefully. That is a chilling observation straight from the latest intelligence by the macro butler. And honestly, it's the absolute perfect anchor for what we're going to unpack today.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We are taking a really deep, structured dive into the macro butler's brilliant report, The Harvest of Chaos. And look, we aren't just talking about the weather today. We're looking at how nature's volatility acts as this massive catalyst, sending financial and geopolitical shockwaves across the entire globe. So, whether you're just here to learn or you're a sophisticated investor trying to figure out how shifting ocean winds can actually impact your portfolio, you are in exactly the right place.
Here's our roadmap for the day. First, we'll meet the dysfunctional weather family. Second, humanity's oldest weather derivative. Third, scarcity, inflation, and geopolitics. Fourth, how governments disguise scarcity with band-aids. Fifth, how to actually trade this chaos. And finally, the macro butler outlook. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1. The dysfunctional weather family. Time to meet nature's rogue central bankers. To really understand global food markets, you first have to understand the ENSO climate system. Think of it less like a predictable weather pattern and much more like a rogue global central banker with a pretty twisted sense of humor. On one hand, you've got El Niño, the warm child. When he arrives, trade winds weaken, Peru floods, Australia dries out, and grain traders literally age prematurely. On the other hand, there's La Niña, the cool sister. She pushes all that warm water back west, dumping heavy rain on Asia and upgrading Atlantic hurricanes into what basically feels like an annual premium subscription service. Essentially, El Niño rotates the stress test to one hemisphere, while La Niña redistributes the misery with equal generosity.
The actual mechanics behind this chaos are just fascinating. These Pacific temperature anomalies physically rewire the global jet streams. During a moderate to strong La Niña, that polar jet stream shifts way further south, drawing out places like the southern U.S. Contrast that with El Niño, where you get this extended Pacific jet stream shifting north. It fundamentally alters where the rain falls and where the heat bakes. It's a physical rewiring of the Earth's agricultural engine.
Moving on to Part 2. Humanity's oldest weather derivative, otherwise known as the agricultural margin call.
You know, the macro butler frames global agriculture not just as farming, but as this massive, highly leveraged bet that's placed every single spring. And Mother Nature treats this bet like a high-stakes game of climatic musical chairs. Every crop eventually loses a seat. A strong El Niño can cause corn yields to just collapse after a few badly timed hot weeks in the US or Brazil. Soybeans, they follow a very similar script. It's a zero-sum game. The global averages completely hide the fact that some farmers are enjoying bumper crops while others are quietly researching bankruptcy lawyers.
Which brings us to Section 3, Scarcity, Inflation, and Geopolitics, the Systemic Contagion.
We have to look way beyond just the local farmer's problem here. When margin calls hit multiple continents simultaneously, we are facing cascading macroeconomic risks. I want you to really consider this. What happens when the entire planet misplaces its harvest at the exact same time? In normal times, markets just substitute one crop for another, right? It's like a diner switching from steak to chicken because beef got too expensive. But when wheat, corn, soybeans, and rice all surge in price together, substitution becomes an economist's fairy tale. And when that happens, scarcity stops being an inconvenience and transforms into a full-blown geopolitical event.
That leads us right into Part 4. Disguising scarcity and those oh-so-predictable policy errors.
So when systemic contagion hits and food security is threatened, how do politicians usually react? Well, rarely with long-term solutions. Instead, out comes the market patchwork. They dilute, they stretch, and they redefine reality. The toolkit is super predictable. Debasing currency, weakening standards, watering down fuel, applying cosmetic statistical fixes, or slapping on export bans. As the macro butler points out, the objective is almost never to actually solve the shortage. It is simply to disguise it long enough to survive the next election cycle. They just repackage the scarcity and cross their fingers that the public stays distracted.
And it's wild to watch how this compounds over time. At month 1, we see what politicians love to call temporary emergency measures. Fast forward a year, and consumer sentiment is deteriorating while economic growth slows. By year 5, that inflation stops being cyclical and becomes entirely structural. As the source notes, This is a potential recipe for what markets might neutrally remember as Trump stagflation, a macroeconomic environment completely defined by slowing growth, stubborn inflation, and a central bank that's trapped between fighting high prices and triggering a recession. A political patch inevitably morphs into dead economy instability.
All right, Section 5, How to Trade the Chaos. Let's talk about positioning for the wealth transfer. So how do you actually turn this whole macro thesis into a sophisticated portfolio defense? You need to look for asymmetric information. Take corn, for instance. A strong El Niño is generally favorable in the Americas, but La Niña brings a massive drought risk, historically triggering an average 34% price growth. Sugar is a totally different story. It sees supply disruptions during La Niña, but really benefits Brazil during El Niño. There is no universal good phase here. It's simply alternating episodes where different parts of the world discover what it feels like to be on the very stressed outside of a trade.
Okay, so how do you execute? You essentially have three distinct vehicles to ride this out. First up, commodity futures. These offer maximum exposure for sure, but also maximum opportunities for margin calls, so be careful. Number two, agribusiness ETFs, like the MU ETF. This gives you a diversified one-ticket tour through a whole ecosystem. Fertilizer producers, seed companies, tractor manufacturers, the whole shebang. And finally, hard assets like farmland. It's one of the oldest inflation hedges in human history. But remember, farmland sits within a political jurisdiction. That makes it vulnerable to export controls or sudden taxation when governments get desperate. Choose your vehicle, but remember, Mother Nature does not provide earnings guidance. Position sizing is absolutely crucial.
Finally, Section 6, the Macro Butler Outlook and our final takeaways.
Let's distill all of this down to the core investment philosophy. The ultimate takeaway? Periods of severe scarcity don't actually destroy wealth, they transfer it. They redistribute it directly toward the people who strategically position themselves long before the storm hit. Modern agriculture is basically a $1 trillion just-in-time miracle, and it works beautifully, right up until the weather, geopolitics, and supply chains decide to have a simultaneous nervous breakdown. True wisdom here doesn't belong to the people panicking at the empty granary. It belongs to those who understand the harvest cycle before the clouds ever start to gather.
If you want to dive deeper into this research and get specialized portfolio guidance, you really need to reach out to the Macro Butler directly. You can shoot an email over to info@themacrobutler.com and definitely check out the full Harvest of Chaos intelligence report over at themacrobutler.com. As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative question to chew on. When the climate shifts and the global crops fail, is your portfolio prepared for the next margin call from Mother Nature?